請勿靠近車門，請不要靠近車門。Please stand back from the doors.
Welcome to What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. My name is Kyle and I'm your host for this podcast about Diaspora Asians in the West and their stories. And today is our first episode. So I brought in special guests to join us on this episode. These special guests are two of my very good friends from back home in Canada, and I've known them for quite a long time. They are also podcasters in their own right. They have their own podcast called DIU PODCAST, Daily Issues Uncovered. And if you want to check them out, make sure you go to diupod.com. And I have been on that podcast a couple of times as well. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the episode where we will talk about living in Canada as Asian, how we know each other, how we feel about being Asian in Canada, and also Asian representation in the media. A lot of good stuff. And I will actually split the episode into two parts. So for part one, we'll just talk about being Asian in the West and our experiences growing up in Canada. And in the second part, part two, we will be talking about Asian representation and what we think of it in the past, now, and the future. So if you're interested, please make sure to not just listen to part one, but also part two. Again, if you want to follow them on their podcast is called DIU Podcast, Daily Issues Uncovered. Find them at diupod.com. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Kyle, KYLE.LKHHK. Now, to the episode. Hello everybody, I'm here today for the season 1, episode 1 of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. And today I brought in special guests. They're good friends of mine. I've known them for a lot of years already, over 14 years. I want to welcome them to the show. They are Gavin and Jack from DIU Podcast.
What up, Kyle?
What's up?
Episode 1 of season 1? Damn, yo, I didn't know we were the first guest.
Yeah, I didn't know either, man.
Dropping a bomb on us. Okay.
I need to bring the heavy hitters. I need to bring the pros in. I mean, you guys have a podcast yourself as well, right?
We do. Jack, you want to tell us about the show?
Our show is called DIU Podcast, and we've been running it for 4 years. We have 3 seasons, and then we renewed for a 4th season.
Oh, so you've been doing it for a long time, over 4 years, right?
Yeah, I think so, something like that, right, Gavin?
Jack doesn't even know. He's completely wrong. He's completely wrong. The show started in 2016. We had 3 seasons, 2.5-ish seasons, 20 episodes each. Jack and I then went our separate ways. This is like the One Piece arc when they time skip. I don't know if you're familiar with One Piece, but in the show they just jump 3 years ahead randomly. Like you're just like, what the hell happened? So Jack and I, we did our time skips. Jack went to teach English in Taiwan. I went to Japan. And 2 years later, we resumed DIU podcast as DIU Pod, which is where we are now. That's the season that's the show we're on season 3. So cumulatively, we've got like a good 6 seasons under our belts.
All right, cool. And can you tell us about what DIU podcast is about? What do you guys talk about? What's your thing?
Well, we're 2 Asians from Canada, Ontario. Grew up in the city, we just talk about daily issues we have, like some hot takes we have, it's just random stuff like about BLM, about, Asians,
oh my God.
In Canada, how we live, like just very controversial stuff as well, Anything to add, Gavin?
Why the oh my God, Gavin?
I feel like Jack, someone who's been on the show for many years, doesn't have the elevator pitch of the show down. Like he's still like trying to say like, what's the show about? For the listeners, the show is it's called Daily Issues Uncovered, DIU Podcast, DIU, right? So Daily Issues Uncovered. Every week, Jack and I, we each bring in an issue, which we think is a big, it's a big topic. It's a big issue. And we try to convince the other person that it's an issue worth discussing. Now, these could be very serious issues. It could be very lighthearted issues, but at the end of the day, they're issues nonetheless. They're daily issues being uncovered.
But at the end of the day, Gavin and I are still friends. We're not like hating each other after every episode. Right, Gavin?
Yes.
He's holding his heart while saying that.
You guys got a good team there, and we talked about the podcast. Why don't we talk a little more about you guys individually? What do you just kind of introduce yourself more, like who you are, what you do, and why don't we start with Gavin first, since it seems like he's better at doing these kind of elevator pitch, unlike Jack.
All right. Yeah. So I do the content editing, the brainstorming session, all that stuff. Jack has some good ideas he brings to the table. 4 years ago, I approached Jack with the idea of making the podcast because I always wanted to get my hands into that audio game. And content is what I do. So photography, videography, illustrations, I'm trying to get into that. But audio, definitely one of the true passions, what I do. So I know the podcast, we need someone with the heavy hitting, controversial takes, which is why I approached my longtime friend Jack.
Yeah, so I give the hot takes. I'm the talent to the show. I talk about stuff that normal people don't want to express themselves. There's a lot of people that are very PC, so I give the non-PC take on it. It's a really great show. I really enjoyed doing the controversial stuff, being the non-PC guy,
So Jack, where can we find this podcast?
We can find this podcast on DIUPod.com. It's a site. We also found Spotify and Google Podcast at DIU Pod.
You really need to up your game of like promoting your own podcast. That seems such a struggle you had of listing out all your places that you can find the podcast.
Bro. I always sell my podcast, from speed dating events to Twitch to like anywhere I can plug, my podcast, our podcast, I would plug.
Jack started a Twitch account because following his lifelong dream of being internet famous, after many, many years of not starting it, we finally got him to start twitching on the podcast. We had to have a whole episode. The whole crew was there telling him, you can do it, man. And whenever Jack twitches now, whenever he's streaming on Twitch now, every 10 seconds, I see just an automatic bot, just like a DIU podcast in the chat. That's how great Jack is at promoting DIU podcast. DIU podcast every 10 seconds in the chat. That's right.
All right. So we talked a little bit about Jack, Gavin, and the podcast. We should actually go into how we know each other kind of more in depth. Like we talked about how we knew each other for 14 years. So how do we know each other really?
Well, I'll start. So I actually known Kyle for 12 years because I moved to where the area we live in later than Gavin. We met in high school. Kyle and I bonded over Linda Chung, a TVB artist, and then we just became friends that way. That's how we started us becoming friends.
So the long story short, we went to the same high school, all three of us.
Yes.
And unbelievably, it's been 10 plus years. And, with the recent years being focused around podcasting, Kyle's been a regular on DIU Pod as well. So shout out to Kyle for always coming in, whether he's dropping facts on Jack or, just in the Discord. We appreciate Kyle and fully support Kyle's journey to starting your own show, man.
I gotta thank you guys because you guys are definitely an inspiration for me to starting this podcast in the first place. I mean, you guys been doing it for so long.
I just want to add, we are actually inspiration for a lot of podcasters out there. We were the OG of the OGs, right, Gavin?
That's right. We invented podcasting.
Talk about it.
People like to think podcast comes from iPod. Completely false. Podcast, the term was invented in 2016. When Jack and I started DIU podcast. Well, that's what Jack is trying to say.
No, that's not what I meant. Okay?
That's exactly what he's saying.
I meant Gavin and I actually one of the few Asians that started podcasting first. Like Asian, Western-born Asians, CBCs or ABCs. I feel like there's not a lot of content creating for podcasters out there. And, Gavin and I were one of the firsts. And then since COVID, I've seen so many people promoting their podcast. People getting affiliated faster than us and everything.
Jack's still salty. We spent a lot of time perfecting the art of podcasting. Let's just say that. And where it is now, though, it seems like everyone has a podcast. It's so easy to set up a podcast, and I think that whatever we do, I don't know if it's good enough,
You
but
guys paved the road for everyone else to walk on.
that's correct. Like Jack said, we invented podcasting.
Well, Jack mentioned that something about Western Asians in the game. To ask you this question that I'm gonna ask every guest of mine, and the name of my show, like, what kind of Asian are you, or at least what do you consider yourself as? What kind of Asian? As we are a podcast focused on talking about diaspora stories from Asians in the West.
Actually, I'll pass the ball on to Gavin to start off because he's better with words than me. I have to collect my thoughts.
What kind of Asian am I? To be honest, I feel like I do have like a very stereotypical Asian Canadian upbringing. But I only say that because that's what I think of when I see other Asians around us. Like we're talking about growing up in high school and how we were sort of classmates. But what we didn't say was the high school, the area we lived in, had a lot of Asian people in it. So when we're in a position like that, where we're in Canada, but also in a neighborhood with a lot of Chinese people, it really makes you feel kind of like accepted, so to say. Because before I moved to where I am now, I was in another neighborhood. The school there had like me and one other Chinese kid. And being in an area like that, although I was still kind of young and everyone was cool, it didn't seem like I was out of place. But then subconsciously, I could tell like being the only Chinese guy here is different. Like I go over to my friend's house, they don't take their shoes off, or they're how these kids interact with their parents is different from how I interact. There's no like Buddha statue at the front entrance, so stuff like that you start beginning to notice, like, maybe being, there's something with being Chinese. Like this is what it means to be Asian in a Western country. And then I moved to where I am now, in a more Asian dominated neighborhood, and you sort of begin to see other people who are living like you. And in that sense, that's why I say I feel like it was kind of stereotypical, because what I know of is like, all my other friends around me, they do the same things as me. Like, they like this kind of stuff. They do this at home. They eat with chopsticks, whatever. So that's what I mean by stereotypical. But honestly, thinking back to Asians everywhere, like throughout Canada, even there's so many different types. And if you were raised in a predominantly non-Asian neighborhood, you're gonna think that's normal. So I think it's kind of a difficult question to ask, but one which is worth looking deeper into.
I would say that's the answer that I kind of expected you having, and I was even say that I would share the same feelings about it, but actually I would actually say what we lived, like the high school surroundings and whatnot, it's actually not that stereotypical compared to like the grand scheme of diaspora Asians, because to this day we can still hear a lot of Asians in America where they were talking about how for the longest time they were the only Asian kid at their school, and that they were made fun of for eating whatever lunches they
Absolutely.
had, like the whole fresh off the boat kind of scenario. For me, that's what I think that's stereotypical. What we had, it was really, really special, I feel.
Because if you think back to like 10 years ago, the people we know. So in that case, it's stereotypical. But then if you look at other like a lot of other medias are coming up, a lot of Asian representation in media is coming up, showing their points of view. So for me to see like that is like, it makes sense. Like how if you're the only Asian guy in the school, you might be made fun of for your lunch or whatever. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Jack? What kind of Asian are you?
I am Fobby Asian. Is that the right term? I don't know if that's the right term.
Go ahead, but you got to explain, what do you mean by Fobby Asian?
I'm very in tune with my culture. I'm really prideful to be, Cantonese speaking. Okay, so growing up, I had a different upbringing than you guys, because I grew up in a different city. And growing up in that city, my closest friends weren't even Asian. They were like, white guys and black guys. I didn't even speak like a lick of Cantonese back then, because I felt like I didn't fit in. you know, when your friends are all black or all white, they only purely speak English. And then I met you guys, and then it kind of deepened, you know, like, oh, I can tell people I watch TVB dramas. Like back then I still watched TV drama with my parents and stuff, right? So when I moved, I can actually like, oh, I can talk about it with some people. I don't feel like I am isolated or disregarded. Like I can't talk about these people because they don't understand, they don't feel what I'm feeling. And I moved, you know, met you guys, and all of you guys watch TV dramas. It's good to fit in and move into a more Asian neighborhood. And I guess that was the start of my journey to become more of a Fobby Asian. You know, I started speaking more Cantonese, you know, because of you know, you guys spoke Chinglish. And then after a while, I realized, you know, moving to Taiwan, you know, teaching in Taiwan, I kind of embraced my culture a bit more, celebrating those Asian holidays I celebrate back in Canada, but it's not as lit here, right? In Canada, those Asian holidays aren't lit. They're just quote unquote another holiday for Asian people, but we don't have that day off. We don't get that day off. You know, like it's as fucked up as it sounds, it doesn't consider a holiday to the Western culture. And then I came back and I became like this guy that's like I said, very prideful of being Asian, you know, always embracing his own culture, you know, fuck what other people think. Back then, I was like, I felt like thinking back, I was dumb. I didn't embrace it. I just conformed to be like a white guy or conformed to be like a black guy. So my journey to become a Fobby Asian is that I am now embracing my culture, speaking my language as much as I can.
That's great for both of you. And I guess you guys at this point in your life, now that we're like in our later 20s, do you feel like you are actually Asian enough?
Sorry, Kyle, what do you mean Asian enough?
Like, do you ever have like a doubt, like, am I Asian enough, or like, am I too Western? Like, there's always like the question of like, as an Asian person living in the West, are you representing enough, or do you feel Asian enough in who you are? Like, it seems like Jack has really said that he is very Asian, but what about you, Gavin?
That's an interesting question. I think to an extent, it really depends on how you see or define being Asian. I know, like, generally, you know, the idea, you know, there are some stereotypes like what kind of food you eat, or if you speak a second language. But I personally don't think that's what really defines you as being Asian. It really is how comfortable you are with your own skin. And I think that's how I would define saying, you know, how Asian are you? If you're okay with who you are, you're not trying to change who you are, you're embracing your culture, like Jack said, and you're prideful. So in that sense, that's what I get from the question, you know, how Asian are you? Because like on the cover, you know, I'm probably not that Asian. Like, if you're talking about the stereotypical things of what you consider someone to be, you know, how Asian are you? But if you're talking about like, am I comfortable in my own skin? I would say I'm very, very comfortable. So then I would say I'm pretty Asian. What about you, Jack?
How would you answer that, Jack? You feel Asian enough?
I feel like I'm still off, but I am close. To me, how I see it, like Gavin said, every perspective is different, right? And I do feel like I'm more Asian than Gavin is, in a sense, because Gavin don't consider me speaking a second language consider quote unquote Asian, but how I see it, I do. Because let's say when I go back to my quote unquote my roots, which is China, right? Where my parents are from. 90% of my relatives are there. And, you know, when they talk to me, you know, they don't outcast me because I can actually speak Cantonese with them, and I get complimented by my Cantonese, or I get complimented by my Mandarin at that point. Like, because I know a lot of CBCs, they go back and they can't really communicate with their relatives because they can't speak English. I mean, they can't speak Chinese, right? They can't speak Mandarin, they can't speak Cantonese. So then that's when that point that those relatives are like, oh, he's like a Western-born kid, he doesn't know better, right? That's what a lot of relatives that I know think about the kids born in the West. But for me, I'm a different story. My relatives don't think that because I communicate very articulately. I basically can speak my own language to a point where, you know, I can survive in that country without having an issue. And I think that's already a huge step closer to being Asian, quote unquote Asian, like you said. So that's why I feel like being quote more Asian is.
So Jack, would you say like for you being Asian enough, the main criteria is the language portion and not the other cultural aspects?
Well, growing up, I do have some cultural aspect from my parents. I was raised to do things a certain way, take off your shoes, or like, in China, for example, in China, if let's say an elder comes at you with like an alcohol drink, right? And they tell you drink with him, you have to drink with him. And when I went back to Asia, I do that because I can't say no. That's not respecting elders. It's kind of giving them face, right? For example, like let's say my cousin, let's say he's older than me and he tells me to drink. I can't say no because Asian culture wise, you have to give him face if he's like, oh, yo, let's drink, cheers or whatever, right? And then you drink, right? That's Asian culture. And I know in the Western culture, you can kind of like, no, I'm not drinking that shit, yo. I'm not drinking that shit, yo. See, I have that sense of culture in me and I just adapt to what that culture is. The only thing I'm missing, I would say, is living in that country and experiencing growing up in that specific country. I think that's the main culture I'm missing. Like, I don't know how the schooling works for that country because I never lived there. How they were raised in that specific place. I think that's the biggest Asianness I would say I'm missing in my portfolio.
That's fair enough. But you were talking about like taking off the shoe as being a very Asian cultural thing, correct?
Yeah.
I just think at this point in 2020 for COVID, given the situation, everyone should be taking off their shoes outside regardless.
There should be no reason. Anyone who's been walking around in public washrooms, walking around on dirty ass concrete, coming into my house with the shoes on. I agree. So in a sense, we're all Asian. Everyone should be Asian.
Yes. I just wanted to mention, like, when I say Asian, I don't just mean like Chinese people. Like, obviously, Japanese people take off their shoes. Korean people take off their shoes. I'm just putting that out there that it's not just Chinese people.
Kyle, what about you though? What about your sense of are you Asian enough?
I feel I'm pretty Asian, but unlike Jack, I feel like even if I do know the language and I lived in that place, I still feel a little bit off in the way that I feel like how I feel in terms of personality and also how I do certain things or how I think is all non-Asian in a lot of regards. So it's like I don't think or feel the same way as possibly like Asians that live in Asia all their life would feel, regardless if they have Western education or not. I feel like I'm missing that part, and I feel like I'm okay with it as I get older. But before, I feel like that was a big thing of me feeling not Asian enough.
Right. So I guess I want to add this on. I want to ask Jack, when you say like you're almost there, are you saying that from the perspective where you want to be like a full Asian? Is that your goal?
No, my goal is not to be a full Asian. I would say it's more so embracing the culture. I would say, like, I know some people don't really care about their own culture. I know people that, like, we're in Canada. No fucks given, right? People like that probably. They're Chinese and they're Asian, right? But I feel like I don't have to be fully Asian. I do have some Western mindset, and growing up in the West, like you guys, I do have kind of a Western mindset on some things. But a lot of times, a lot of people say, Jack, why do you have such a traditional mindset? And I think this really comes from my Asian side and the Fobby side of me.
Mm-hmm. So you would say you're more traditional, right?
I am more Asian traditional, yes.
That makes sense. Well, we talked a lot about like how Asian do feel. I just also want to know, like, how do you feel living in Canada as an Asian person? Like, do you feel any different, or like, do you find yourself like not exactly fitting in as much as you think you should be able to fit in, like in like mainstream Western society, whereas like majority of the people are actually not Asian?
I'm gonna go first on this one, and I just want to say, like, in the West, we'll always be considered an outsider. No matter where we are in the West, in Canada, in the US, in Australia, we'll always be considered an outsider. One of my, like, I always wanted to go back to Asia and live there, which I did, but I mean, like, in a sense, in my hometown maybe. But, we'll always have that bamboo ceiling. We'll always be never good enough as white people. And, like, living in the West, there's always that void that can't be filled being an Asian. Yes, yeah, we're that what's that word? That that Asian guy. Oh, he does his accountant. He's an IT guy. He does work. But he'll never reach that full potential of reaching that, let's say, CEO level, because he's Asian, he's Chinese. To get there, we had to go back to Asia to fully have that potential. Because, like, obviously we know English too, right? that gives us an edge in Asia. But being in Canada, I just feel like we'll never reach that full potential, and we'll always have that void, and we'll always be like an outsider.
For you, Gavin?
I want to go the opposite road of Jack. I know Jack is a bit pessimistic about his outlooks living in Canada. I think, first of all, like we've mentioned a few times, living in a so-called bubble, in our high school days, I never felt like an outsider. But I would say that's a special circumstance, like you said as well, Kyle. If we're talking about a very multicultural city like Toronto, I don't feel like an outsider. So I'm just going to say that right off the bat. Who knows? If you threw me in Manitoba, maybe I'll feel like an outsider, right? So I can't speak from that perspective. I can only speak of the perspective of living in one of the world's most diverse and multicultural cities. I absolutely don't feel like an outsider, and I feel like I can accomplish anything, anywhere. I can go anywhere as far as my skills take me. And to hear Jack say, there's the bamboo ceiling is a bit disheartening, but I can see why he would think that. I just think, there are going to be, there are Chinese CEOs, there are, billionaire Chinese people, and they don't necessarily need to be in their realm, on their side, on our side of the world in order to make it big. And I just want to say there's a lot of opportunities here, and more so than America, if we're talking about North America, because as much as we like to say, Canada's multicultural, it's more so than America, but in these past few years, we're learning it's, maybe not so multicultural, there is a lot of systemic racism, but to keep things on track, I would say for the most part, living in Toronto, I've never felt like an outsider.
Oh, that's good. And Jack, saying that you feel like there's a certain level you can reach in Canada, but like obviously there could be higher that you could reach. It's just that there's a bamboo ceiling, you say. But if say like you go back to Asia or something, do you feel like you truly feel happy though? Going back, because a lot of people, at least diaspora Asians, have this kind of mindset like things are so much better back in the homeland, and that America or North America is crappy because of how it's racist against Asian Americans and blah blah blah. But do you really feel like things are better in the East though?
Well, in the East, like at least there's no racism towards us Asians, calling us the Chinese virus, like at least that doesn't happen in China, right? Or like, just there's no limits. I feel like in Asia, there's no, because you're Asian. If you're a white guy going back to China, then maybe there's limits on what you can do. Maybe you can't be a CEO there. But to me, I feel like being in Canada, and don't get me wrong, I do agree with Gavin. Canada does have the best opportunities out of all the Western countries, in my opinion. It's the least racism in all the Western countries, I feel like. And Gavin's right on that. But no matter how accepted we are, no matter how people like us, I do feel like in the West, we're always considered an outsider because we're not white.
I think we also have to consider the fact that there's also a lot of like racism that occurs in Asia that isn't exactly like towards us, but it's still an issue that we can't like overlook. I mean, you've been in Taiwan before. You can see there's racism that's going on. It's just that you don't feel it because you're yellow face, you're Chinese.
No, I'm not saying there's no racism in Asia. There is. I know there's racism against Black people. There for sure is. But at least I, as a person, won't be discriminated in Asia because I'm yellow skinned. I'm same as everyone else. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right, fair enough. Well,
it's very easy. Like if you and I, Jack or Kyle, you're in Singapore already, but like for us to go to an East Asian country at least, where we can kind of fit in and blend in, it's versus if you're like the only one Chinese guy in a prairie province, everyone's looking at you, everyone's giving you stares, or you're maybe there's no overt racism, but like there's a subtle racism where I've spoken to a lot of friends overseas as well while living in Korea, while living in Japan. People like Black friends always say like I get stared at on the bus, and for them it's white friends, Black friends, because they're the ones who are the the outside race, so to say, the outsiders in this sense. Whereas back home, some Chinese people might feel like they're getting stared at. Maybe not because they're like unique or, because, there's a lot of immigration. It's not weird if you see someone who's Asian, but it's like if you roll up to like a all white city or small town
neighborhood,
like an all white small town, you'll know, like people will know when you're there. And I'm not saying, they're trying to be actively racist, but those subtle looks you can tell. And when white people or black people, they go live in Asia as expats, then they get those looks. So it's kind of, I guess I see where Jack's coming from by saying at least we can go there and not get those looks.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And the fact that we can feel like we're at home, we're not like looked at upon as like someone that's just here. We belong in the place. Would you say so,
Sorry,
Jack?
Kyle, I want to add on one more thing though. While in Asia, we might look like one of them, most definitely there's always going to be reminders that you're not one of them. If you don't understand the subtlety of the culture, or maybe, first time you're in a convenience store, you're like, what the hell do I do? Maybe it's like, how do I get gas something like, how do I get gas for my car?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
There are going to be those reminders that you're not one of them. So you could front as much as you want. No one's going to look at you if you're walking down the street, but don't be fooled. As diaspora kids, it's hard to say we belong there as well.
This has been an episode of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast, episode 1, season 1. I hope you enjoy it. And again, my name is Kyle. Till next time, but make sure to follow me on Instagram at Kyle, KYLE.LKHHK. Bye-bye. Peace out.